into their land. He didn't know anything about that. And yet he, by faith in the one who called him, was willing just to step out. And so how does God look at what Abram did? Well, in Hebrews, if you go to Hebrews 11, zip over there a second, Hebrews 11, 8 and 9. In the New American Standard Bible, it says, by faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. In the NIV, it's very similar, but it says, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Now, that's happened to me a couple times, but not on purpose. You know, I thought I knew where I was going, and I really like to have things under control. When we're out on a trip or a journey, I want to have everything planned out. I don't like that feeling of not knowing where I'm going. But Abraham just stepped out, and by faith, he did that. And so if we look then just a couple verses back in Hebrews 11, we see that that component is incredibly important. Hebrews 11:6 says, and without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And so it was the very fact, that very faith part of it, that made it pleasing to God. You know, a lot of times we want to know what God's will is. We want to know the end product. We want to know where we should be. I'm like that anyway. But what I read from this is it's really not the end product that God's concerned about. God's concerned with the fact that we will go where he asks us to go and step out by faith. That's the part he's concerned about. It's not, you know, the end of the journey that God's concerned about. It's the process of taking the journey with him that's important to him. And so I think that leads us to maybe a kind of scary conclusion, that God may not tell us where we're going. You know, I don't like that very much. But because that faith component is the part that he cares about, he's not going to reveal everything to us at the very beginning. Now, I don't know if I will ever get comfortable with that. But as long as I know that that's kind of how God operates, at least I know that he is going to go there with me. And in the midst of that journey, God will be with me. And that helps me with that faith. So the first kind of journey is a faith journey. A second kind of journey that I think we're guaranteed to take is an unchosen journey. An unchosen journey. You know, travel companies, they got to get creative now. You know, that travel dollar is hard to come by. And so in an effort to capture that highly competitive vacation dollar, they're really going all out to offer vacationers what they call complete package vacations, where they don't just get you there, but you get the best seats to the attractions or the most extreme sporting events or the backstage passes to meet the stars. But you know, sometimes these companies, they miss the mark a little bit. They put together packages that for some reason just aren't chosen. So I'm going to give you the top 5 surprise journeys that were not chosen. Okay, top 5 surprise journeys you probably wouldn't choose. Number 1, the most congested cities of the world tour. You're absolutely, positively assured of 8 to 10 hours in the tour bus, but you're always within 10 miles of the hotel. You'll be fine shooting pictures from out your window with no worries about those blurry pictures because you're not moving. So you can get out, walk around for 20 minutes, relax. The line won't have moved at all. Doesn't it? Wow, inviting. Number 2, the Fantastic Factories of New Jersey vacation package. Nothing highlights a Sunset Lake smoke, huh? Number 3, the Guaranteed to be Gored vacation plan to Pamplona, Spain during the running of the bulls. Complete with ointment. Number 4, these when I was writing them, these were funny. I was laughing when I wrote them. Number 4, hiking the 14ers of Kansas package. Turns out they were talking about the towns that got over 114 degrees each summer. That's what they were talking about. And finally, the surprise journey you probably wouldn't choose, the Refreshing Rivers of the Sahara tour. So, it looks like water out there, but it's not very refreshing. So, I think, though, if we want to look at an unchosen journey that's scriptural, I think one of the best examples would be that taken by Joseph. If you, again, want to turn in your Bibles to Genesis 37. You know, here's a guy, Joseph, as a young man, was his dad's favorite. His dad gave him this beautiful jacket of many colors. And he was the favored one, and so he had all these brothers who really didn't appreciate that too much. And to make matters worse, I'm not sure, you know, as a young man, you may say things that, you know, you think are just, you know, you're just saying them because you think they're facts. And he kind of got under his brother's skin. You know, he said, hey, guys, guess what? I just had this great dream, and you and Mom and Dad, all y'all, you're going to be bowing down to me someday. What do you think of that? Amazing, right? You know, and he didn't care for that. And so at one point, all his brothers were out, and they were taking care of the sheep, and they were out a ways away from the family. And so his dad sent him out there, and he said, go see what's going on with those guys. And so he comes, and they can see him a long way away. I think that jacket was pretty well distinguishable. And so they see him off in the distance. And they say, look, here comes that dreamer. Man, that guy ticks me off. You know, and so they, you know, some of the other brothers say, you know what, let's just kill him. Now, that seems a little bit extreme, but his oldest brother, Reuben, says, now, you know what, let's just throw him in a well. Which I just, okay, that's way better. And so they decide to do that. And then Reuben's out. And then some Midianites come by. They're merchants. They're coming through to Egypt, and they come by, and so all the rest of them say, hey, let's get rid of him for good, and we'll take him out of the well and sell him to the Midianites. Now, when his dad asked him to go see his brothers, I'm pretty sure that the next part of this journey was not one that he would have chosen. And so in Genesis 37:28, it says, so when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. And so there he goes, off as a prisoner, not choosing where he would go. He's going to be sold as a slave. And so then just a few verses later, in verse 36, we see what happens. It says, meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. And so here's Joseph in a foreign country, doesn't know the language. He's never been there before. He's a slave in the house of one of the highest officials of the land. Now, what is very amazing about this is from the moment that Joseph gets where he's going, wherever that happens to be, God blesses him. God sees in Joseph the faithfulness and the willingness, the availability to be obedient day by day, no matter where he is, no matter the fact that he didn't get to choose where he was. And so he kind of moves up the ranks in Potiphar's house. And Potiphar's wife has her eye on him, and she accuses him at some point later of raping her, even though his only crime was to say no to her. And so then he gets thrown into jail. And while he's in jail, being faithful and obedient and available, he gets to be the captain of the guard in the jail. Even though he's still in jail, he gets to help in there. And while he's in there, he meets a couple guys, a baker and a wine taster. And they have these dreams. And since Joseph already knew about dreams, and I bet at this point he's going, man, it doesn't look like I'm getting very close to that where my parents and my brothers are going to bow down to me, because here I am kind of in the lowliest place that I could be in a foreign land. They don't know where I am. There's no way they could know where I am. This isn't going to be very much like I thought it was going to turn out. But he said, tell me your dreams. And they do, and he tells them what's going to happen, and it does. And one of them gets killed, and the other one isn't. But then he forgets about Joseph until a few years later when Pharaoh has a dream. And then he says, hey, when I was in prison, this guy named Joseph told me what the dream was all about, and he was able to help me, and maybe he can tell you what your dream means. And you guys know the rest of the story. It all turns out. You know, God has a way of taking us on a journey that we would have never planned out. That would not be the way I would have written the story, you know, especially if I was Joseph. And all of those things do come to pass. Because once Joseph tells Pharaoh his dream and what it's all about, Pharaoh can see that God is working in his life. Or at least there's some wisdom in this young man. And he appoints him as kind of a deliverer over Egypt, because what Joseph has predicted in those dreams that God allowed him to see in Pharaoh's dreams was the fact that a famine was coming. They would have several good years of food and then famine. And so he says, you're in charge. You get to figure out how we're going to make it through this famine. And so Joseph has the plan. He makes sure everybody has plenty of food in those 7 years of plenty. And then in the 7 years of famine, he's got a lot stored up. And lo and behold, his brothers come to Egypt to get some grain. And, you know, it's kind of interesting, too. You know, I see a little bit of me, not in the faithful part, but just the trickery part of Joseph in his life. Because, you know, he hides himself from his brothers. They don't recognize him. And he you know, brings them before and says, you're spies, and gets them all scared. And then he puts back their money in their baskets, and they're all... And I don't know if he was just, you know, trying to get back a little at them. I don't know. But in the final analysis, they come back before Joseph, and he can't hide himself from them any longer. And that's where we pick up in Genesis 45, verses 4 and 5. And he says to his brothers, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. And then in verse 8 it says, so then it was not you who sent me here, but God. You know, Joseph is even giving God the credit for their underhandedness. That God knew what he was doing. That when Joseph was sold to the Midianites, God was in that, even in that. So even in a journey completely unchosen by him, Joseph knew, he absolutely knew that God was in it. And I think we as followers of Christ need to be in that place too. It's not an easy place. There are circumstances in your life. They may be happening right now that you have no idea why it's happening. But God is faithful. And God is sovereign. He's sovereign over people, over nature, over events. And even if they don't make sense to you right now, even if you would never have chosen them right now, God is in it. I think many of you would agree that now that you're here and you look back at another journey you might have taken years ago, you would have said, I would have never chosen it. But look at what God did. Look at how God orchestrated those events. And here I am now because of those past events. Again, not chosen, not planned, but God is faithful. So that unchosen journey is a journey we're going to take. If you haven't already, you will. Now, the last type of journey is one in which everything is laid out for you ahead of time. Kind of like those vacation packages, except you actually would choose it. And this is a journey that I'm going to call the treasure map journey